Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
What about others? Can you hear me? Can you see my screen? Srikar, Varsha.
Yes, yes, I can see your screen. Vijay.
Okay. Okay, let me start the session. So yesterday what we have done is we have created form, table, button, and we initialized 5 empty row objects in table for accepting item records. This is what we have done in yesterday's session. For now, what we'll do is we'll try to implement this event handler. Step 4. Okay, there is form here, there's a table, and then there is a button here. After that, we initialized 5 empty row objects by using onInit method. Now the pending topic is like we have to implement event handler in this scenario. That is insert header items EH. So let me implement this functionality here. Let me make it like this. So today we are directly dealing with step 4. In fourth view controller, we have to implement event handler, insert header item CH. So let me go to that. And this is a screen we have developed yesterday. Form table button. In fourth view, we have done this. So let me go to fourth view controller. In fourth view controller, we have placed insert header items EH, and this event handler we are going to implement. So our main target is, first we need to capture. We have to capture header record from this particular form. There is a form here. We need to capture header record from this form. And then there is a table. From table, we need to capture collection of item records. There's a table. From table, we need to capture collection of item records. They are collection of input item records. Capture item records from table. Here it is collection of item records, so you have to use for loop. We have to use for loop because table contains collection of item records. For that reason, we have to use for loop. And then we need to assign header record to some data object. If you want to send these values, I want to send header record to backend. I want to send item records also to backend simultaneously. So first assign header record to data object. And then we need to assign item records to data object with navigation property. Assign item records to the same data object but with a differentiator navigation property. So that means data object contains both header record and item records. First assign data object with header record, then assign data object with navigation property for assigning item records. So finally data object contains both header and items. Then you need to access OData service using OData model. Access OData service using OData model that you are already aware of. And then you need to call create front-end method. You have to call create front-end method. You need to pass data object. Data object internally contains header plus items, everything. You have to call create front-end method and pass data object. Header plus items will be available as part of data object by the time you execute this line. And you need to configure entity set. To configure entity set. So technically what happens here? Create front-end method executes create deep entity method. Of backend system. Create front-end method technically executes create deep entity method of backend OData service. If backend functionality success, then success callback is triggered. Success callback function is executed in front end. If backend functionality is failed, then automatically failure callback function is triggered. In front end. So this is the overall approach you need to follow in this event handler to complete this scenario. Okay, let me go step by step here. First, let us capture header record from simple form. Capture header record from simple form. So here you can use this dot get view dot by ID. Provide the ID of first input field, and you can call get value method. Simple form contains collection of input fields. So you can capture individual values of that header record by using this dot get view dot by ID. Provide the ID of each screen element, input screen element, then call get value method. So here you will get something like user ID. Header record user ID. So you can hold it locally. Okay, let me make it like user ID value as a variable. So let me go for fourth view, which contains all the IDs of these input fields. Yesterday we have created a form which contains all input fields, and there are some ID for each input field. So let me use it here. Header record user ID, header record first name, header record last name. So that we are trying to capture by using this code with the help of its respective input field IDs. So here, let me make it like first name value as a variable, last name value, email ID. This is like country, salary, phone. So there is nothing new in this particular code as of now, because this type of code we have already implemented earlier. So this dot get view dot by ID, provide the ID of each input field. Then you can call get value method. You'll be able to capture the value. So the purpose of this code is to capture header record values. And we're capturing header record values from simple form. So that is basically step 1 inside this event handler. Now the next step is you need to capture item records from the table using for loop. Here there is a table. Table may accept collection of item records. So those item records you need to capture. Collection of item records means you need to use a for loop here in order to capture item records from table. So first what we'll do is we'll try to use this dot get view dot by ID and provide the ID of table. For item table, yesterday we have created a table. Table contains ID as my items table. It contains ID as my items table. So first get the reference of the table. By providing its ID, you'll get table reference here. This dot get view dot by ID, provide the ID of that screen element. In this case, we are providing the ID of item data table. So you'll get the table reference. Now what you can do is you can get the model associated with this table. In yesterday's session, we have assigned JSON model to the table. In yesterday's session, JSON model is assigned to the table at the front-end perspective. So you need to get that model associated with the table. So you can use table reference dot get model. You will get the model associated with the table in the front end. Ultimately, you'll get table related model. Like a table related model. That is basically you'll get JSON model in this case because empty rows are assigned through JSON model. We can say it's a table related model. That's a JSON model. Or in simple words, you can make it like a model, whatever. So you can use table reference dot get model. You'll get the model which is already associated with the table. Because the rows are generated in a table through JSON model as per yesterday's session. And for this table contains items as aggregation property. Table contains items as aggregation property. So you can use table reference dot get items. So you can expect reference to that table items aggregation property here. Or let us make it like items of a table. Table reference dot get model, you'll get the model associated with the table. Table reference dot get items, you can get items associated with that table. Now we need to make use of some array. So all the item records, whatever we capture, I want to capture those things and I need to put it in one array before sending the values to the backend. There may be 5 item records here. We need to capture each item record and you need to put everything inside an array before sending the values to the backend. Capture each item record through for loop and put everything inside an array. And that array you need to pass it to data object with navigation property. Then you have to pass data object to the backend OData service. So first of all, let us declare one empty array. Let us declare one empty array here. For example, item data array. Let us declare like this. Array is declared by using square brackets. Square brackets indicates array. As of now, square brackets, it's empty square brackets. So that means it's an empty array. So whatever item records you capture, ultimately you put it inside this item data array. Now, how to capture item record? So you can use for loop here. You can use where. Okay, let me use for loop with cover brackets, and here within brackets you can use where with row index. Row index starts from 0. We have used this for loop for multi-combo box, multi-input screen elements also earlier. This is the third time we are using it. First time we used for multi-combo box for capturing multiple selected item records or whatever records. Second time we have used for loop for capturing collection of selected item record or item values from multi-input screen element. Now this is the third time we are using it on a table. So for loop is used earlier on multi-combo box. Capture selected values from multi-combo box. For loop is also used on multi-input earlier. This is to capture selected values from multi-inputs. Now we are using for loop. This is the third time we are using. This is on table. In this case, we need to capture records. We need to capture records. In this case, we are calling it as item records. But ultimately, for loop is required here also. So let us start with row index 0. And you can use row index less than something like this, total items dot length. You can use that. We have captured total items from table reference, and that you can use it items dot length to get the total capacity. So the for loop gets executed till row index less than items dot length. Now each time the row index should be incremented by 1. So you can use row index plus plus. Each time row index will be incremented by 1. So row index equal to 0, and the incrementation should happen till row index less than items dot length. So when row index is 0, we are going to capture first item record from table. When row index is technically 1, we are going to capture second item record from the same table. Row index is 2. We are going to capture third item record from the table. And row index is 3. When row index is 3, we have to capture fourth item record. When row index is 4, in this case, we are going to capture fifth item record. So row index starts from 0 and it executes up to row index 4 because row index starts from 0. So total 5 item records we are going to capture inside this for loop. So that's the purpose of row index less than items dot length. Total items are 5, but the row index will reach up to 4 because row index is starting from 0. So 0 to 4, the total 5 items will be captured. Row index from 0 to 4. So that means total 5 items will be captured. So how to do that? So we can use items of row index dot, we can use binding context, get binding context. And here you're going to get item row. Earlier also we have used to capture single record from the table. When you're capturing single record, we are using something like table reference dot get binding context. If you want to capture single record from a table, selected record from a table. But in today's session, we're capturing multiple records. So use items with row index dot get binding context. So this statement gets executed for each iteration. You'll be able to capture all the item records from a table. If you want to capture selected record, then we have to use table reference dot get binding context. That is used in one of the event handler in previous sessions. Now here we have to capture collection of item records from a table. So use items of row index dot get binding context. Then you'll get item row for each iteration. You'll get item row for each iteration. Now you can use a model. A model dot get property here. I want to capture individual values of each item record. I want to capture individual values of each record, each item record. So first field is user ID. So here for user ID from item row, I need to capture its individual value. So that is user ID value. Similarly, you can repeat this. The second field, that is product ID. I want to capture product ID from this item row. So you can put it here as product ID. And I want to capture product name from this item row. So you can use product name as a variable. I want to capture product price from this item row. So you can hold that value in this variable, that is product price. So what we're trying to do is we're capturing individual values of each item row. For first iteration, row index is 0. When row index is 0, you'll get first item record. From first item record, we're capturing individual values of that record. So when row index is 0, we capture first item record. And by using this statement, by using get property, we are capturing individual values. Individual values of that item record. That is what we are trying to do by using get property, provide the field name, and then pass that item row. From that item row, you'll be able to get individual values like user ID, product name, product price. So that iteration will continue. Now, ultimately, all the item record values should reach item data array. Whatever you do it here, but ultimately, every item record, you need to pass it to this item data array. You have to pass it to item data array. So what you can do is you can use item data array. But it's an array. If it is an array, you can use push method. If you want to add each and every item record, you can use push method. This is something like your append in your normal ABAP. On internal table, we can use append method. Similarly, on array, we have to use push method here. In normal ABAP, on internal table, we can use append statement. In the front end side, on array, we can use push method. Similar to that. So each and every item record, you need to put it inside this item data array. That you can do it by using push method here. So while pushing that each item record, you try to push it with a proper field name in the form of an object. So use flower bracket that indicates an object. Within that object, you provide the field name, that is user ID. For that, you can pass this variable and use comma separator. Provide product ID, the second field, and pass this variable. The value will be passed dynamically. Then third field is product name. Pass this variable. The fourth field is product price. And pass this variable here. So what we're trying to do is we are simply passing each and every item record through this item data array by using a push method here. So when row index is 0, what happens is first item record object is passed to item data array. When row index is 1, second item record object is passed to item data array. And that story will continue here. So when row index is 2, third item record is pushed to item data array. When row index is 3, the fourth item record is pushed to item data array. Row index is 4, fifth item record object is passed to item data array. So item data array finally contains all item records captured from the table. Item data array finally contains all item records which are captured from a table screen element. Item record 1, item record 2, 3, 4, and 5. Everything will reach to this item data array based on this row index through for loop. So push method is like appending a record to an internal table. Here we are appending record to item data array. So finally, I can say item data array contains all item records which are captured from table screen element. So that is basically the final point. According to step 2, all the item records should come to array. That's the reason why we are using item data array dot push method, and we are passing each item record values we are passing here. Inside for loop, we are trying to do this. So that is basically step 2 that we have done here. Capture item records from a table using for loop. That is what we have done now. Now everything is simple. Just assign header record to data object. We can simplify this code, but let me go step by step individually. So assign header record to the data object. So what we can do is you can come out of this for loop. Just come out of this for loop. Now assign header record to the data object. So first declare data object here. You know how to declare data object. So you can use where something like data object. Object is declared by using flower brackets. Array is declared by using square brackets. Object is declared by using flower brackets. Object is declared by using flower brackets. Array is declared by using square brackets. So here I want to declare an object, so use flower brackets. Now you can use data object dot header record field name user ID. Data object dot header record field name first name. Data object dot header record field name, that is last name. Data object dot email ID. We can simplify this code. We can minimize the lines, but just to go step by step, I'm following this approach. Data object dot country. Data object dot salary is also part of header record. Data object dot phone number. So we need to assign header record values to this data object. Now the header record values are captured individually here. So why don't you pass these values? So we need to pass header record user ID value. To pass header record first name value. Similarly, last name value. And header record email ID value. Then header record country value, salary value, and phone number value. So in this case, after executing these lines, I can say at this point of time, data object contains complete header record. After executing these 7 lines, I can say data object holds complete header record. So whatever is captured from this form, whatever header record is captured from this form is ultimately reaching data object here. Now what's the next step? Next step is assign item records. Assign item records to data object with navigation property. So our item records are part of item data array. So why don't you pass it here? Data object dot, you have to use navigation property equal to, you can assign all item records. All item records are already placed inside item data array by using for loop. So why don't you pass that here? So first we are assigning header record to data object, then we are assigning all item records to this data object with the help of navigation property. In our case, in the backend navigation property is np on user ID. It can be XYZ. In our case, in the backend OData service, navigation property is np on user ID. So that you can provide here. So these 7 lines will help you to assign header record. This last line will help you to assign all item records. So first we are assigning header record, then here we are assigning all item records with the help of navigation property. Item data array contains all item records after executing for loop. So everything we are assigning to data object with navigation property here. Now what we need to do? we need to call create front-end method. Sorry, we need to access, first we need to access OData service using OData model. I want to connect to backend system, OData service. And I need to pass header record, item record, everything I need to pass it. So first access OData service using OData model. You are already aware of this, where OData model, new SAP UI model.odata. From that you can access OData model. SAP UI model.odata, that's a library. In that library, OData model is a class. For that class, you can provide service URL. So in our case, the service URL is SAP OPU OData SAP / the service name. For this functionality, I think we are using one service, Z9PM header items OData project, SRV. That's a service name we are accessing. At 9 p.m. header items OData project _ SRV. That's a service which is dealing with header items by using create deep entity method. Create deep entity method is implemented in this service in the backend. So that service we are trying to connect. Now, what's the last step? The last step is you can use OData model. On that, you can call create front-end method. So here, the last step is you have to call create front-end method. Pass data object. Data object contains header and items. And don't forget configure entity set. By doing that, it internally executes create deep entity method. In the backend service, create front-end method executes create deep entity method of backend service. So here, we're calling create front-end method, but it internally executes create deep entity method of OData service, because our data object contains navigation property. If data object contains navigation property, then create deep entity method will be executed. If data object doesn't contain navigation property, then create entity method is executed in the backend. Create front-end method executes create entity method of OData service if data object doesn't contain navigation property. OData model dot create front-end method. Same create front-end method, but in this case, internally executes create deep entity method. Create deep entity method is executed if data object contains navigation property. Front-end method is same, but backend method execution is different. It is depending upon whether navigation property is used or not. If backend contains navigation property, then create entity method is getting executed. If data object doesn't contain navigation property, then create entity method is executed in the backend. If data object contains navigation property, create deep entity method is executed in the backend. But the front-end side, we have to use create method itself. Whatever may be the backend scenario, front-end side, create method is used. Whether it is create entity or create deep entity, whether it contains navigation property or not, it doesn't matter, but front-end side, you have to call create front-end method. If you use navigation property, then create deep entity is executed. If you don't use navigation property, create entity method is executed. So now in our case, we are going to execute create deep entity because in data object, we have provided navigation property. So here you need to provide entity set. In our case, the entity set is user header set. In this case, pass data object. If you don't want to use other parameters, use null. And then try to use function here. Use function. First function is a success callback function here. Use flower brackets. That's a success callback function. Use comma separator. Then use another function. That's a failure callback function. This type of approach we have already followed earlier. The same thing we are trying to use now. First function is success callback function according to the framework. Second function is a failure callback function according to framework. I've already shown you in the documentation also. First one is success callback function. Second one is error callback function. Error callback function is nothing but failure callback function. So if the backend operation is success, then this code gets executed. sap.m.messagebox. You can print a success method here. You can use success message here. And you can say header plus items inserted successfully. You can print some message. And here, if the backend operation is failed, then this block is executed. You can use error method. And you can say header plus item records not inserted. Not inserted. So first function is success callback function. Second function is failure callback function. In first function, we are using success method from message box. In second function, we are using error method from message box. And don't forget, we are calling create frontend method. We are configuring entity set. We are passing data object. So data object is the most important thing here. From frontend, the values are passed to backend with the help of data object here. From frontend theory, we are passing the header record, item records, everything to backend with the help of data object, because data object internally contains header and items here. That's how we have managed earlier in these lines. Here data object contains header record. Here data object contains item records with navigation property. So finally, data object contains everything, header and items. Okay, so first let me run the application. If it is working, then I'll explain step by step once again. First, let me run this. So let me go to fourth screen. From fourth screen, we are trying to handle this. And let me open backend tables also. For verification, just let me open backend tables. Let me write that here. For data verification. You can open SAP backend tables. Open S11 T code. Set user info table. That is header database table. In our scenario, in OData service, this table is referred, header database table. And you can open S11, another table in this scenario that is used as Z user details table. That's items database table. So here, check header record. Here in this table, and you can check item records in this table. Why we are using these tables? Because in OData service, in insert statement, I've used these two tables in the backend. How to develop OData service, we are going to discuss in OData development. Don't worry now. The backend functionalities, we are going to write scratch level in create deep entity method. The topics, backend development, we are going to discuss when we start OData topics. But at this point of time, I can say OData service is using these two tables. One is header database table, another is item database table. In first table, you can check header record is inserted or not. In second table, you can check item records are inserted or not. And don't forget here, OData service contains create deep entity method implementation for this scenario. Let me open these tables. SE11. Okay, first table, that is Z user info table. So here you can see there are some records. These are header records according to our scenario. These are the header records according to our scenario, existing header records. Now, let me go to another table. Let me open another table. Set user details table. So user ID, product ID. Okay, you can see user ID, product name, product price. So this is item data table. So these are some of the item records already available here. But now what I want to do, I want to insert header record in one table, item records in another table. I want to do this from Fiori application. So there are two tables now. Okay, let me put it like this, just for verification. Now let me run the front end screen. This is a front end screen. So let me insert header record. For example, 1001, this header record I want to insert. So this is a header record. Now we are running the Fiori screen. And for this header record, there is a common field that is user ID. So now I want to insert item records, like for example, product ID P1, or let me provide item record I1. For example, desktop. Product price, let me make it 90,000. I2, the product ID, that's nothing but item record I2. For example, laptop, let me make it 80,000. I3, and this is like tablet, 70,000. I4, make it like mobile, 60,000. I5, for example, keyboard. So here, header record is provided in form, item records are provided in table. Let me click insert button. Okay, so I think functionality is not executed. Let me check. This .getView.byId is not a function. So there is some problem somewhere. Let me check it. in line number 79, this dot get view dot by ID. Okay, it's not responding to this. Let me check. What's the problem? Okay, my items table. Okay, so here there is a problem. My items table. ID is my items table. Let me correct it. I think it's.
Or weave, that bracket is missing, sir. Get
Okay,
weave.
so this dot, yeah, this dot get view brackets is missing. The ID same, ID is, there is no problem with ID, but here brackets are missing. Yeah. Let me add it. Okay, I think we need to run it again. I think we need to provide all the values once again. So let me directly go to fourth screen. So as of now, no data is inserted. You can see 1001 record is not available and 1001 items are also not available. So let me insert that 1001. And here let me provide common user ID. And let me provide, for example, P1, that's item record 1, with the desktop. P2 is item record 2, laptop. P3 is item record 3, for example, tablet. Then P4, mobile. P5, let me use mouse or keyboard. Right, so let me click insert button here. When I click insert button, still it's not responding. Okay, so it is responding. So now you can see we are able to get a success message here. Header plus item records inserted successfully. It is inserting header record in one table, it is inserting item records in another table, and finally it is printing a success message in the front end. Header plus items inserted successfully. What is the proof? If you want the proof, you can open tables now. So first table, if you refresh here, you can see 1001. So this record is newly inserted as a header record. You can notice that. And for this header record 1001, what are the items? Let me open another table here. So if you refresh right side table, now you can see 1001 contains P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. Desktop, laptop, tablet, mobile, keyboard. So one header record in first table, 5 item records on another table, that is item table. Everything is inserted now. And finally, we are getting a common message here. So first table is having header record. Second table is having all item records. So everything is inserted simultaneously. And finally, we are getting a message to the front-end query screen, something like this. Now let me try one more header record. For example, 1002. 1002, for example, okay, let me just make it like this. For 1002, let me provide common user ID. You can automate, but anyhow, we are manually providing. And let me provide, for example, item I1, item I2, item I3, item I4, item I5. And here, let me provide something like, for example, mouse. just like router. Let me use this as make this as keyboard. Just like mobile, for example. So here 1002 contains header record with these values in a form, and 1002 with item records I1, I2, I3, I4, I5. 5 item records. If I click insert button, then you can see we're getting a success message here. Header plus items inserted successfully. What's the proof? Open tables here if you want. You can refresh here. Now you can see second header record is inserted. 1002 Sachin Tendulkar, Sachin@ca.com. So that's a header record in this case. What about item records? You can refresh here. When you refresh now, you can see 1002 contains I1, I2, I3, I4, I5. Mouse, router, hard disk, keyboard, mobile. So item records are also inserted. And final message, we are able to get it here in this case. So this code is working fine. Let me copy all these lines. This is a functionality. So in continuation with yesterday's session, just open fourth view controller. Insert header items EH is a event handler. Inside that, we have written this entire functionality. Let it be like this. Now let me explain step by step once again. Okay, so first what we're trying to do here is in these lines. Okay, so this is the overall code for first two steps. So insert header items EH event handler. Inside this event handler, we have implemented the functionality. So in this event handler, what we have done is first we captured header record, then we captured item records. So all these lines, closely observe all these lines. These lines are just capturing header record values. Capture header record from simple form input fields. That's the purpose of these lines. And then what we're trying to do is by using this for loop, of course, we are using some more lines here, but ultimately here we are using this for loop. This for loop plays an important role. By using this for loop, we are capturing each item record and we're passing each item record everything to item data array. That is very important here. We are using for loop. Within for loop, we are capturing item record values and we are passing everything to item data array. So here in these lines, we are capturing item record values from table string element. And we are doing this using for loop. And don't forget, after executing this entire for loop, item data array finally contains the complete all 5 item records in this case. Let me save this. This is like capture header record and capture item records. Now, after that, we have written these lines. We have written all these lines here. The same event handler, what we're trying to do, we're trying to assign header record to data object. We are assigning item records to data object. Here we are assigning header record values to data object. Assign header record to data object. These are values captured from simple form. These are the values captured from simple form, but we are placing everything inside data object. So that means finally we are assigning header record values to data object. These are the header record values. Everything is assigned to data object. Of course, data object is declared here. Now, here in this line, we are assigning all item records to data object with navigation property. In this line, we are assigning all item records to data object with navigation property. Assign item records to data object with navigation property. Assign item records to data object with navigation property. So our item records are part of item data array after executing for loop. All those items we are assigning it to data object with the help of navigation property. In the backend, in that service, NP on user ID is the name of the navigation property. That's the reason why the same name we are referring in the front end. After executing for loop, item data array contains all items. Everything we are passing to data object by indicating with navigation property. So after that, here, this is very simple. We are trying to connect to OData service. Access OData service using OData model. That's how backend connection is established. And the most important is by using OData model. Okay, let me put it like this. So here we are using OData model. So we are using OData model here after establishing connection with OData service. So this OData model will help you to connect to backend. So in this case, we are trying to call create frontend method. And we are configuring entity set. And the most important is we are passing data object here. That's the most important thing in this entire scenario. So header record, item records, everything is passed from front end to back end with the help of data object. So create is a front end method here. And user header set is an entity set. This is the name of the entity set in the backend. Data object contains header plus items. Header plus item records. Everything we are passing through data object here. So this is create is a front end method. User header set is entity set. And then data object contains both header record and item records. So that's how you can pass a number of records. You can pass it through data object. It can be single record or multiple records. If there is single record, don't use navigation property. If there are collection of records, use navigation property. That's the only difference. And here, okay, let me write this. This is success callback function. And this is failure callback function. This approach is used earlier in our CRUD methods also. So we are trying to call create front-end method. Configure entity sets. Pass data object. So what happens? Create front-end method. Executes internally create deep entity method of OData service. Create front-end method. Executes create deep entity method of OData service. Now, if the operation is success, the first function is executed. If the operation is failed, second function is triggered. If backend operation is success, success callback function is triggered. Then front-end side, success callback function is triggered. Or function is executed, whatever. Let me put it here. Similarly, if the backend operation is failed, second function is triggered. That is, front-end side failure callback function is triggered. We can call it as error callback function or failure callback function. So this is how the code gets executed. And ultimately, we are able to get that message here after inserting. Now, okay, let me save this. Okay, so here, when you pass data object, let me explain one basic thing before I stop. So this data object holds header record and item records. How it is going to hold that? Let me just give one simple diagram. And in the next session, we are going to debug this entire code. We'll try to debug this entire scenario, front-end side debugging, back-end side debugging, then you'll get more clarity. So this scenario will continue in the next session also. I'll be explaining step by step with the debugging, front-end side, back-end side. But as of now, let me just explain data object pattern here. When you're passing front-end data object to back-end, so basically data object contains two sections. Data object with header record. Data object contains header record with respect to these fields. According to our scenario, Data object contains these fields initially. These are header record fields. Not only that, it also maintains, data object also maintains something like navigation property here. In our case, it is NP on user ID. In our case, NP on user ID. This is going to hold item records in the same data object. And for item records, there are some fields. Let me provide here. Navigation property. Through navigation property, we are going to hold item records with respect to these fields. Like user ID is a common field, then product ID, product name, product price. Let me put it here. So the format of data object looks like this in general. So it contains two sections here. Data object contains two sections. One is for header record, another is for item records. So this is the overall data object format when you send front-end data object to the backend. So data object contains header data fields. Data object contains navigation property. With navigation property, we are going to hold item data fields. So that means when you pass the data, data will be available in this format. For example, 1001. So this is header record. Header record is kept in this. Header record is kept in this format inside this particular data object. Not only header record, for that header record, there will be item records with common user ID field. So for example, P1, desktop, product price, for example, 90,000. Same header record with different item, P2, laptop, something like 80,000. Let me just use the same format. So P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, something like this. Desktop, laptop, tablet, mobile. So here, these are the collection of item records. Item records are represented by using navigation property. So header record will be part of data object, and its item records are also part of the same data object here. But item records are represented by using navigation property within the data object. Within the data object, item records are pointed through navigation property here. Navigation property is a representation for these item records in combination with header record. But ultimately, everything will be part of data object when you send from front end to back end. So this is a representation, overall representation. So when front-end app data is transferred to backend system, OData service. And data object basically refers to header record by default. Data object with navigation property. It's a representation. Data object with navigation property, it is a pointer to item records. Just remember this. Data object by default is a representation for header record. Data object with navigation property, it represents item records. So when you pass data object basically contains everything now. Data object contains header record, data object with navigation property, it contains item record. So if you pass data object, header record, item record, everything is simultaneously passed from front end to the back end. So just remember this simple note. When you pass front end data to back end system or data service, data object basically contains everything, header record and item records. Of course, item records are managed through navigation property here, but data object is a main object in this case. And that representation is already provided here. You can just visualize this. Data object, entire data object contains two sections, header section and data object contains item section. Item section is represented with navigation property. That's the important thing here. So when you send front-end data to back-end, so everything is transferred here. It's a combination. Everything is transferred simultaneously. If we use plus operator, that means everything is transferred simultaneously. Header record as well as item records. Okay, so just remember this. We are going to execute line by line in debugging front end side, back end side. Simultaneously, we are going to do it. At that stage, you will understand this data object format also, along with some more internal things. Okay, so I'll stop here. Next session, same scenario, we'll understand with debugging. Step by step, line by line, we are going to do it. And we'll understand all the internal things. What is happening in backend, what is happening in front end, how data is transferred, how the data is represented. Everything we'll try to do that. After that, I'll clarify your doubts if still you have any in the next session. Okay.